Good morning. Let's dispense with the three repeat good morning, and then you say good morning back, and I tell you it's not good enough. Let's just assume that you've done your best, and I've accepted it. Welcome to the first Kettering Conversation with Democracy Innovators for 2024. There will be more. The topic today is political violence in the U.S. landscape. Are we ready? I'm not. I'm Brad Rourke. I lead the Kettering Foundation's DC work. We have an almost full room. It's going to continue to get more and more full. We have hundreds watching on Zoom from all around the globe and all around the nation, and we have a full agenda. So just a few quick items, and then we're going to get right into it. For those of you who don't know us yet, Kettering Foundation is a nonpartisan, nonprofit operating foundation founded in 1927 by the inventor Charles F. Kettering. Among hundreds of other things, he invented the electric car starter, which we all use just about every day unless you drive a Tesla. We're headquartered in Dayton, Ohio, and have offices here in DC on the Senate side of the Hill. Hope you'll come and see us. We focus exclusively on inclusive democracy. We work to inspire and connect people and organizations to advance thriving and inclusive democracies around the globe. We believe all people belong and have the right to engage in and shape a democracy that serves them. I want to very quickly thank the people who made this event possible. They're too numerous to name each one and single them out, but I do want to mention just a few. Caroline Parati, first and foremost, whose hand is upon everything you see, along with Darla Minnick and Kate Schneider, who together made the trains run on time with grace and aplomb and cheer. My colleague Derek Barker, who is chair of this series of speaking events. Melinda Gilmore, our director of communications, who is our not-so-secret weapon at the Kettering Foundation. Please join me in thanking all of them. While I'm thanking people, I also want to make sure I thank our board member who traveled a ways to be here, Suzanne Morse-Mumaw. Thank you for being here. You might have seen that we announced a completely new website and brand identity last week, CF Melinda Gilmore. To learn more, I urge you to visit our website, kettering.org. Speaking of new, and speaking of people in the room, there's a new program that we're very proud of and very excited about, and I want to share it with you and draw your attention to it. That is our Senior Fellows Program. We've established this truly distinguished multi-partisan group of professionals who are true thought leaders in their own fields. Some you're going to hear from today, including giant of TV journalism Chris Matthews, former FBI Director Jim Comey, and breaking news here, Human Rights Campaign President Kelley Robinson, who is going to be announced as a new senior fellow within days. Thank you for being here. Some of our other senior fellows are in this room. Former Spelman College President Johnetta Betch-Cole, thank you for being here. Former Chief, there's a lot, so let's do one big one. Former Chief Justice of the Ohio Supreme Court, Maureen O'Connor. Former Ohio Democratic Party Chair David Pepper, retired Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, thank you for being here. Also breaking news will be announced shortly. Former New Jersey Governor and EPA Administrator Christine Todd Whitman, thank you for being here. And there's a few who could not make it today. And I just want to name them because we're so proud of them. Also breaking news, the renowned Reverend Dr. William Barber. See? Professor Stephen Levitsky. Former Deputy Solicitor General Neil Katyal, also to be announced. Voto Latino founder and president Maria Teresa Kumar. Judge J. Michael Ludig. And them, along with our named fellowship holders, former Kansas Governor and HHS Secretary Kathleen Sebelius, and our Fanning Fellow TV news legend, Judy Woodruff. We're so proud of this program of fellows, and we're so happy about you who are here today and who you will hear from. So please join me in thanking them. I want to stress that these fellows who are here today are not here because we said, please come, we require your presence. They're here because they thought it important to be here at this conversation. And I'm very excited to begin this conversation. 3 years ago, America and the globe were dazed. I know I was. Having lived through a shocking, violent attempt to subvert the peaceful transfer of power that had been the hallmark of American democracy for over 2 centuries. We thought it was a blip. But now political violence and the threat of political violence remains a problem. What do we know about it? What can we do about it? What have we learned? What can we do? Are there areas for hope? Are there areas for concerted action? How can we address, mitigate, stop, or live with political violence in the U.S. landscape? We're going to have a panel, a brief set of remarks, lunch, and then a conversation. We're going to start with the panel, and so I'd like to invite to the stage our first panel, which will share perspectives on political violence. That's Donna Edwards, former member of Congress from Maryland in Prince George's County; Alan Jenkins, professor of practice at Harvard Law School, author and driver of an innovative graphic novel on January 6th. Come on up. And Alex Theodoridis, associate professor of political science at UMass Amherst, co-director of the UMass Amherst poll. Alan, you're there. Thank you, Donna. Take it.
Grab your shoulder.
You may.
Thank you.
I'll move my foot, too.
Thanks.
It's all slapstick up here. Chris. Okay, let's have a quick conversation. I'd like to start with you, Donna. You held a congressional seat for many years, campaigned to return famously in your RV, going door to door in your district. You were in your party's leadership structure while in office. Now you are vice chair of the Association of Former Members of Congress. As a former public official and leader, still a leader, really, what makes you so concerned about the prospect of political violence in this coming year?
First of all, thanks so much to the Kettering Foundation for inviting us for this really important conversation. You know, I talk to a number of my former colleagues all the time. We have dinner, we have conversations. What makes me concerned is what I hear from them, that they're frightened, that in their districts there is an elevated level of violence and threats, that they have changed their behavior as members of Congress in terms of the way that they reach out and connect with their constituents, and that this issue of threats of violence happens all the time. It isn't a random occurrence. I know when I was in Congress that we would get threats, report them to the Capitol Police. There'd be an investigation. Officers might go out to visit the household, but they were at a distance. And now it seems that at least the threats of violence, and I think there's a thin line between a threat and then something that becomes an action. And when you look at the numbers of Americans who believe that violence is an appropriate response to a policy difference, to an election, that's frightening, where it may have been kind of under the covers and probably always there in the among the public, that today those ideas are held by fully a quarter of Americans, that they tend more to be held on the right than the left, but no one is immune. And I think that we have to take all of this really seriously. And frankly, what happened on January 6th is evidence of that. And when I think back to that day and witnessing, all of us looking at that on television as it unfolded, those are the doors at the Capitol where you go into of the hallmark of our democracy, and it is now acceptable to threaten our institutions in that way, and views that are held by such a significant majority of our neighbors.
Mm-hmm. Let me shift over to Alex Theodoridis for a moment to respond to that. You're one of the national experts on political violence. You wrote what I think is the seminal paper on dehumanizing rhetoric, minted from UVA, Berkeley, go Bears, and Harvard, and you helped found the UVA Center for Politics, so I guess we have you to blame for Larry Sabato. As co-director of the UMass Amherst poll, you see a massive amount of survey data. What do we need to know about political violence?
Yeah, like Donna, I'm very concerned about the violence itself and the consequences of the violence in terms of behavior, people choosing to participate or not, choosing to run for office or not, choosing to be election officials or not. I'm very concerned about that. From a public opinion perspective, I'm extremely concerned about the people who aren't committing the violence, because still violence, mercifully is rare in American politics, but we have a lot of people out there who are tacitly endorsing violence. Some of them are elites, and obviously the rest of us take our cues from elites, usually elected officials, and that tacit endorsement is what really can sort of feed this ramp up to electoral violence at a level that would make January 6th seem like nothing, and that's really what concerns me, because that's where you would see all the research suggests that when we have elites using dehumanizing rhetoric, as you mentioned, endorsing violence, saying things like, well, we've just had the perpetrators of January 6th called hostages, that this was just a protest is sort of a common refrain out there. The average voter needs to hear, the average citizen needs to hear from elites on their own side that these things are not okay, that political violence is never okay. And if they don't hear that, then you go down this road of just different realities on both sides, and it can lead to a very, very dangerous place in terms of proliferating the kind of violence we've seen just a tad of.
Mm-hmm. Congresswoman, can I come back to you and just ask you, and I'm going off script here, so I hope you all can bear with me. Just reflect on the leadership role, the in-party leadership role of leaders in either accelerating or tamping down the threat of political violence. And then I'm going to ask you a question now.
Well, we've seen that as evidence coming out of January 6th. You will recall that there are a number of January 6th defendants who in their statements to the court said that they were inspired, and felt encouraged by the former president to engage in their criminal behavior on January 6th. We've heard from leadership most recently from the former president. From what was really disturbing to me is listening to the third-ranking Republican in the House, Elise Stefanik of New York, echo the description of January 6th defendants as hostages. And I think that this is, in so many ways, this kind of language actually gives permission to those who might engage in violence to take it from, if they believe that they're righteous and just, then there is nothing that prevents them from engaging in criminal and violent behavior. It's a permission slip. And leadership matters. I mean, part of the reason that we've seen leaders, for example, when other violence has taken place, leaders go to the floor of the House, or they stand in front of a camera and they decry that violence. And unfortunately, that is not what we're seeing from so many leaders who are giving permission on their behalf for that kind of action. That, I think, is more disturbing, because if our leaders are going to do that, then there's nothing stopping an ordinary citizen acting on their own from engaging in behavior. Not necessarily organized action, but individuals who take it upon themselves to act out that violence. And let me just close here. Over this holiday season, the swatting that has taken place of not just elected officials, but volunteer poll workers and others is more evidence of that individual actors believe that they have the permission to engage in this behavior, not even orchestrated or coordinated in any fashion.
Can I just add on?
You
to
may. I have no control.
It's particularly important in terms of this responsibility of elites, both elected officials, people in the media. It's particularly important that people hear this from their own side in this polarized world, and that's partly the problem that we have. We have an asymmetric elite failure to really push back against the kind of language, the kind of behavior that is just unacceptable and ends up being not just a threat of violence, but part of democratic backsliding. Violence itself is a component of democratic backsliding, or can be.
Alan Jenkins, professor of practice at Harvard Law, focusing on race, the Supreme Court, and communications. You've explored this topic in a very interesting way I want to describe. But you've got an amazing career in government, in the Solicitor General's office, in philanthropy at Ford Foundation, associate counsel at NAACP's Legal Defense Education Fund. But more recently, you've thought about this topic of political violence in the form of a graphic novel. I have your most recent one here, second edition of 1/6, which Kettering is proud to be part supporter of. But this is really an alternative future, a speculative future of really the story is, what if 1/6 had succeeded? Could you describe a little bit, and you didn't start like just now, you started a while ago, right? So describe your state of mind and what was on your mind when you began this project, and maybe contrast that with how you're feeling now, today, January 9, 2024, in Washington, D.C.
Well, so first, thank you to the Kettering Foundation, both for having us here and for supporting the comic book series, available now on Amazon. And, like probably everybody in this room, I watched the events of January 6th, shocked but not completely surprised. Right? We saw the road to 1/6, and 1/6, of course, being the violence at the Capitol, the fake elector scheme, the strong-arming of local and harassment of local election officials and the Vice President of the United States. And so I was still shocked that it happened, but in many ways intellectually not surprised. I found myself waking up at 4 a.m. Morning after morning, worrying about our democracy. And as the other panelists have said, the fact that the forces that led to the violence that day had, if not remained the same, actually grown. The authoritarianism, the green light for political violence, the white supremacy and anti-Semitism that were the fuel for a lot of the violence that day had grown, and that the nation was already, and this was in the early days, already beginning to turn away from what had happened. This was before the wave of denialism and revisionism that we've seen since. And of course, we've seen that before in our nation's history, after the Civil War and Reconstruction, when the next wave was the retelling of the history of slavery and Reconstruction through lies and propaganda and the lost cause. And so, we could see, my co-writer, Gan Golan, and I could see where this was headed. And so, as a law professor, I could have written a law review article, which I've done, and it would have been read by tens of people in small rooms with, pointy heads. But I wanted to reach a much broader audience and hopefully actually engage and persuade people who were skeptical, who were disconnected, who love our democracy but didn't have time to read the 820-page House Select Committee report on the insurrection. And so we created a comic book as a vehicle because pop culture has, when it's done right and is entertaining, which I hope this is, has the power to reach across divisions of age and demographics and ideology, and to move people. It has the ability, and we saw the passing of Norman Lear just recently, someone who recognized that humor and entertainment and engagement can cause people to have empathy with folks who they didn't think they shared values with, and to lower some of their barriers and actually hear new truths. A very quick story that I'll tell you. So I've been now to 4 Comic-Cons in the last 6 months. Well, if people who know me know I did not need an excuse to go to a Comic-Con. But at Baltimore Comic-Con, I was at a table with the book. Gentleman came up to me with his son. The gentleman had his Yoda backpack, baby Yoda backpack, and his son was dressed as Darth Vader, which maybe should have tipped me off. And he said, "This book looks great, really interesting. I want to buy it. Were you there? Where did the idea come from?" And I said, "Well, we interviewed a lot of people." And he said, "Well, I was there." I said, "Really? What were you doing there?" He said, "Well, the president told me to come." Yeah. And so I went. And I saw him speak at the Ellipse, and he told us to go to the Capitol, and so I went. And there were other people starting to break into, and by the way, he took out his phone and showed us a bunch of photos of himself at the Capitol on January 6th. And he kept saying, "I don't usually talk about this." I'm thinking, dude, we just met. Well, and by the way, I was dressed as a Union officer from the Civil War because Comic-Con. So he showed me these photos. He said he was about to break into the Capitol with his cohort. And a woman who he had come on the bus with said, "We got kids at home. I don't think we should do this. I think we're going to get in trouble." And he said the fever broke, or that particular fever broke, and he didn't do it. And he said a number of people he came down there with were prosecuted. He found himself looking over his shoulder for a year, he told me, expecting the FBI to break down his door. But according to his telling of the story, he didn't do it because someone who he trusted was able to speak reason to him in that moment. Now, he did not say to me, and I now realize that everything I believed was wrong, but I could see that he was struggling with where the truth lay. And importantly, how else would I have had a 20-minute conversation with an insurrectionist that was civilized, that was where we shared values and shared enthusiasm about a pop culture vehicle? The last part of the story is that, so he bought a copy, and he left, and I thought, man, I hope he doesn't read this thing before I get out of here. And about 10 minutes later, he came back. And I thought, what's going to happen? He said, "Could you sign this for me?" And I signed it, and he was off. So did I change his worldview forever? I don't know. But I think I had a chance. And it's a chance that I would not have had if I had only written that law review article read by tens of people in dark rooms.
Well, it seems to me, Alan, that you should join me in my RV Lucille as I go around the country, because those are exactly the conversations that I have, sitting around having a beer with the guys on the campground who are largely Trump supporters and endorsers, and the conversation that is actually, it is a conversation and not about changing minds, but about figuring out, what's going on in the country. And I think that we need to have more of those conversations as friends, as neighbors, as members of a community, because we demonstrate by that we can have civilized conversations without resorting to violence.
I'm on board, and you know this, Donna, of course, but a way to think about it is camping is culture.
Right.
There's a camping culture, and I do a lot of camping,
believe me.
including last summer, and in which I was roasting marshmallows with folks that had Confederate flags on their trailers and all kinds of things. Did we change each other's worldview forever? Probably not. But we brought humanity, and the kind of humanity that at its best makes the idea of violence impossible. So I'm with you.
Let me praise you both, but also problematize this. Alan, it took you 20 minutes and a comic book. Donna, it takes you door to door in an RV. Meanwhile, one of the people in the audience, Brad Fitch, who is president of the Congressional Management Foundation, sent me an article over the weekend saying, you're going to talk about political violence. Maybe you read this, and it was in Vox. I don't know if you all saw it, but it was just over the weekend. And one of the sections of that article describes the ways in which, in party, the threats of violence are used, not so much kinetically to threaten other side, but to keep people in line. So self-policing, if you will. I mean, is there any hope for culture to undermine, overcome, mitigate that? Either of you.
Such a good question. I mean, look, I do think, if you talk offline with some of my former colleagues who voted not to certify the election on January 6th, they will tell you that they felt like they had to do it. Not that they believed it, not that they subscribed to it, but they felt that they had to do it. I think that is a problem when elected officials are policing themselves in order not to feel those threats of violence. I mean, we've heard reports of members who voted not to certify the election who say that they did so because they felt that their family might be threatened. It's changed their behavior. Look, the reality is that we can't have 20-minute conversations with 300 million Americans to change their minds, but each of us in our individual communities and spaces can have those conversations. And I think it's incumbent on us to do it. And who's best positioned to do that, frankly, are our leaders.
Yeah, I would just add to your question, Brad, is there hope? Absolutely. I think, I agree with Alex that it's crucial for leaders, for in-party leaders, as you described, to be speaking out and condemning violence and also resolving tough questions in ways that do not use violence. It's also true that we're all part of multiple communities, right? We're part of families, we're part of our neighborhood, we're part of our faith tradition or our camping culture or our comic book culture. And those are also all places where we need to make sure we're pulling people towards democratic values and equal dignity when, whether it's a political figure or someone else is thinking about the consequences of how they vote or what they do or say. They're certainly thinking about their political community, but they're probably also thinking, well, what's my faith community going to have to say to me about what I'm about to do? What are the folks who I go camping with every Sunday? I'm going to be accountable to them as well and have to explain myself. And so the political sector is crucial, and we need to demand and expect leadership and integrity there. It's also the case that we're part of lots of other communities, and I think we need to engage with the right values in those communities as well.
Well, here's a reality check. If a quarter of Americans believe that, or nearly a quarter believe that political violence is an answer or a response, that means that 75% of us don't. And so whenever I see these numbers, I have to remind myself about the 75%, because that means that the overwhelming majority of us have a different kind of responsibility and response and we can't be afraid to step up. And frankly, it's those numbers that have tamped down political violence in the past, and we need to begin to exercise our power and our ability to have those conversations with our neighbors.
Alex.
When you research what I research, you get the opportunity to be a real bummer a lot of the time, both in the media, but also just in conversations with friends. And so I'm going to do that a little bit right now. One of the problems is that the nature of polarization today, and partly the reason we have this affective polarization that we have, is because party identity has become sorted with all of these other communities that you're talking about, right? So there is still some overlap, what we call cross-cutting identities, but partisanship is now correlated at a very high level with all sorts of things that have nothing to do with politics, right? And so there are fewer opportunities for those types of interactions. People saying, oh, well, what does my faith-based community think about this? Well, for most people, it thinks exactly what they think, and that's part of the challenge. Now, that's normal. Polarization is totally normal. It was weird, the period of politics that I grew up with, and that most of you in this room are sort of old enough to remember, where ideology wasn't even that correlated with your partisanship, right? That was weird. That was a leftover, basically, of the Civil War, right? And the fact that party identity is such a strong, lasting attachment. But it's much more normal when you have two parties for people to split into groups that are correlated with their ideology, with their worldview, with their race, their education level, all of these things. And so that's the really challenging thing that we face in this current moment. And that's why it's so important that the elites on the side where violence is happening immediately sort of saying, no, we can't have this. Because yes, maybe it's only 25%. In fact, I think it's less of people who think consciously violence is okay, violence is an option that's available to me. Most people aren't paying that much attention to politics right now. The problem is, by not paying attention to politics, they engage in this kind of blind partisanship. They just go with what their side says. And when you go with what your side says, you eventually normalize dehumanization, you normalize violence to a point where it just becomes part of our political culture, and that's what we have to avoid.
Mm-hmm. Let me pursue you just for a moment. I'm not sure about how I language that, but if you read the smart articles about political violence these days, there's always a section in it that where someone says, historically, America has always had political violence, which is absolutely true, and we've written violence on so many aspects of our society in ways that we have not even yet begun to talk about today yet, but I believe we will, I hope. What do you say, though, to the statement, well, we've always had this kind of political violence, and yet here we are. What's different now? I start with Alex, and then Donna around.
Well, so we have always had political violence. The difference, and we've always had polarization, by the way, right? Lots of polarization about the Vietnam War. Lots of polarization about race relations in our country, about civil rights. Lots of polarization about issues related to women, et cetera. Always been a lot of polarization, but it used to play out across the parties and within the parties. It wasn't partisan polarization, and partisan polarization has a very different flavor. And the reason for that, the thing that keeps people like me up at night, people who study polarization, is there's this concern that because democracy becomes the target of partisan polarization, elections become caught in the crossfire, that we start seeing this incentive to deny the results of an election, right? To push as hard as you can to steal an election, which is what January 6th was, the culmination of an effort to steal a presidential election. It was a ham-handed effort, But we can't count on all of them being that. And so that's the concern, is that it leads to this incentive to try to undermine democracy. And most people aren't paying attention, and maybe we gradually whittle away at some of the norms and some of the institutions that keep our democracy going until by the time everyone's paying attention, it's too late. You can't say anything. We're Hungary, we're Turkey. And so that's the big concern, is that partisan polarization and the violence that it begets is just different in kind from nonpartisan polarization. Because our system is so based on parties, despite the fact that our founders were skeptical of parties.
Mm-hmm. Alan, what's different now?
Well, I don't know if it's different. I think an additional dynamic is that white supremacy has metastasized at a national level that we haven't seen for a long time. It's certainly not new, but that we haven't seen for a long time. So, you know, again, I'll harken back to that period between Reconstruction and the second Reconstruction of the Civil Rights Movement, where you had plenty of political violence and personal violence, and it was used to deny the franchise, to overturn elections, there was a coup that occurred in the southern states over that period. But you know, most of us I spent most of my life as a civil rights lawyer, we always thought, well, white folks won't do that to each other. And now they are. And white supremacy continues to be a significant driver of that, ironically. That violence, often white-on-white violence, political violence, that is driven in significant part by white supremacy and white nationalism, and Christian nationalism, that in my view has metastasized in a way that, you know, people like Martin Luther King Jr. warned would happen, that this isn't only about black folks, that if American society does not step back from the use of violence and the rampant bigotry and misinformation and lies, it's going to come back to challenge our very democracy itself. And I think that's what's different, is that we're now seeing that our nation is on the brink of just that kind of a challenge.
Donna Edwards, as a leader, is courage even possible anymore?
Well, I mean, I think in a room like this and otherwise, we have to say yes, because if we don't, then it means that we've given up the store. And I don't think I'm willing to do that. And I think, you know, part of what the difference today is in recent years is the tacit and open endorsement by leaders who have a microphone, a megaphone, to join in with the forces who believe that violence is acceptable. And that is really different. And I think that the courage has to come from within the party dynamics, that where you have leaders within the parties. And what we've seen is that when there are leaders in their party who step up and say no, they are just, you know, quickly ousted. I mean, we could start, you know, a running list of those who basically run away, for example, from the Republican Party. I mean, I would urge people, and I talk to a lot of folks who say, I'm no longer a part of the Republican Party, or they've become independents. I say, stay in the fight, stay in the party, and just, you know, to try to rebuild some semblance of a party that really is a viable opposition party with the Democratic Party. I mean, it doesn't do any of us any good just to have a conversation with ourselves. And it's easy now to do that because, you know, our social media lends to that. If you just want to find people who think like you do and talk with those people, totally easy to do. And so unless our leadership are having that conversation across these lines, then I think it makes it really difficult to find the courage to step outside of those party definitions. And I worry that too many of our leaders or people who are in political leadership positions really step back because they're afraid of being ostracized by their colleagues.
Alex.
Yeah, to that point, I conducted a survey with the UMass poll of the membership of the U.S. Association of Former Members of Congress that Donna is vice president of, and we had a great response. Almost 300 former members responded, and what you see there is a real disconnect between the Republican former members of Congress and the Republican electorate, and also the public stances of current Republican elected officials. 82% of the respondents said that they believe Joe Biden's election was legitimate. That compares to like 25% of Republican voters. 64% told us that they believe Donald Trump's efforts to claim he won the election are a threat to democracy. This is among Republican former members of Congress, and I conducted this poll. This is not a bunch of rhinos. These are people who, a lot of them are still active in the party, who if you focused on what they did, these were staunch conservative, very partisan Republicans. And so 64% told us that Donald Trump's efforts to claim he won the election are a threat to democracy. That compares to like less than 20% among voters. They were much more likely to describe January 6th as an insurrection or a riot. Very few voters do that. And so there is a group out there who have not been drinking the Kool-Aid. And yes, as Donna points out, they get expelled, right? It's hard to believe a Liz Cheney, right, with the last name Cheney in Wyoming, basically gets kicked out of the Republican Party, but she's had an impact, right? Hearing that maybe, provides some backbone to some Republicans who are in office today. And certainly there are people out there who are in the rank and file of the Republican Party who are not, in the sort of MAGA group, who hear that and say, you know what, I can still be a Republican without believing this stuff.
Well, and it's a reminder to us, and thanks, Alex, for the survey, that your data show that the importance of elevating those voices, and these former members are all across the country. They span a wide range of the time that they spent in Congress, and their voices are really important, and they don't carry what is the mainstream of the elected Republican leadership now, but they still are really important voices in their communities, in their districts, in their states, and in terms of influencing current members of Congress.
In the 90 seconds we have left, Alan, one policy that we can enact now to help mitigate political violence, and then a call to action from you, Donna Edwards.
All right, I'm going to try to talk fast. So
yes.
We partnered with Western States Center on the comic book, and so there's a free education and action guide that readers can download. Solutions, I'm going to say, don't bring a PowerPoint to a culture war. We need to get engaged. We need our everyday folks to get engaged at the local level as well as at the national and policy level, to be attending town hall meetings and supporting librarians and vulnerable folks, transgender folks and migrants and others in their local communities. There are a lot of things, read the guide, that everyday folks can do. And then, of course, accountability matters. And so, we're in a national debate about whether there should be political and potentially legal liability and accountability for inciting political violence. And I think we need to, insist that the answer is yes.
Donna Edwards, what is your call to action?
Wow. First of all, this is a really important year, and it's going to be a defining moment for our democracy and for us deciding whether we're going to hold on to our institutions. And I think, like Alan and Alex have said, that nobody is exempt from your responsibility to do something. And that something can be signing up to be a poll worker, working in your local elections, running for political office at every single level, and then calling on all of us and our leaders to uphold our democracy. I mean, we have something that's worth holding on to. The world is watching us. And, and I think that, when I think about from now until Election Day are going to be some of the most vulnerable pressure points that we've ever faced in this country. And I know that, people are fond of saying that this is the most important election of our lifetime. Well, I'm going to say it. This is the most important election of our lifetime. And it's up to us to figure out what it is that we're going to leave for that next generation. And not a single one of us is exempt from what it is that we need to do. So let's get on with it.
Please join me in thanking this amazing panel. And now I will invite you to exit stage left.
Okay.
Mindy, if you could provide some help. And now we have a special treat. I'm going to patter a little bit while our panel leaves. And thank you so much. That was fantastic. I want to introduce to you Kelley Robinson. She's president of the Human Rights Campaign, which is 3 million members strong, 200 staff strong, and is the most important organization of its kind that I know of, certainly. She's the first Black queer woman to lead them. She has deep, deep organizing experience for decades, has been at the forefront of the fight for bodily autonomy and racial and gender equity for many, many years. She comes to the Human Rights Campaign most recently from being executive director of Planned Parenthood Action Fund. In her work, she focuses on lifting up marginalized communities, building political power, and we just began to hear, I think, in the most recent panel, how important in this climate focusing on the especially vulnerable is. And we wanted to make sure that she had a chance to really center that question. So I'd like to invite Kelley Robinson to the stage, who will give us a little bit of time. And Kelley, you can speak here, or someone was going to have a microphone for you.
This
All
is
right.
great. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you so much. Can we give it up for the Kettering Foundation and that incredible panel? I don't know about you, but I don't like to watch horror movies in the morning, and that was a little scary. It was like when you're watching Jurassic Park and they're at the beginning saying, oh, sure, it's a good idea for us to grow dinosaurs here. Nothing wrong could happen, right? It's one of those moments where you see all the things growing and festering that we've noticed for so many decades coming to the point of being about to hatch and asking yourself, what can we do now to make a difference? And I'm really appreciative for that panel for grounding us and for me, inspiring me too. Being here today just feels like such a treat. I can't believe I'm in this room with this group of people talking about such an important topic at such a critical moment in time for us. And for me, I wanted to be here for two reasons. One, to applaud the incredible work of the Kettering Foundation, to applaud Sharon for her outstanding leadership and their unwavering commitment to advancing and protecting our democracy. When I think about the work that Kettering does, it's not only about protecting democracy as it is, but also as it should be, and as it could be if we were to work together to center all of the people of this great nation. And I think here at the Kettering Foundation, you know so clearly that in the words of Dr. King, the moral arc of the universe always bends towards justice, but it doesn't happen by accident. It takes people pulling and pushing and prodding and willing it to do so. And I feel like this conversation is a call to arms and a call to action for us to be a part of that work. So the second reason I'm so excited here is to accept that call to take action to protect our democracy, that call to recognize political violence that's on the rise, that call to restore our very humanity in this country that is under threat. At this time of year, I often think about my family, especially my great aunt. She passed away a few years ago at the age of 102. I know, you're thinking I'm going to live forever, so this is great. But when she passed away, we had a homegoing celebration to end all homegoing celebrations in Muscatine, Iowa. That's where my family's historically from. I'm telling you, we rented out the VFW. We did line dancing like there was no tomorrow. We drank up every wine cooler in the region. I am certain of it. And as part of the celebration, they told the story of my family. And our family story is that we were enslaved people in Mississippi and Louisiana that escaped north and settled in Iowa, one of the first states to rebuke the Fugitive Slave Act and not send slaves back south. And Muscatine, Iowa was actually the town where we are the first black family to ever live. And in the course of my great aunt's life, they told this story, is that she actually sat at the footsteps of people who were born into slavery. How profound is that? 2 generations before I'm standing here today, my great aunt is sitting at the footsteps of people who are born into slavery. And here I got the nerve to be the president of the Human Rights Campaign, talking to you about how we are going to protect and save our democracy. You asked that panel, is there hope to be found? And my answer is yes. You cannot tell me progress isn't happening. You can't tell me that hope isn't possible when I'm standing before you in a room like this talking about what's possible for our democracy. We have to hold on to that. We have to remember that so much of the violence that we're experiencing now is actually a response to the progress that we have made over generations to get to this very point. To get to the point where we are asking ourselves and this nation to say for certain and for sure, who is this democracy for? To me, that is at the heart of so many of the questions that are in front of us and also the opportunity that we have together. Christopher, you told me that PowerPoint would work. It didn't on my iPad, just letting you know. But I'm coming into my second year of the Human Rights Campaign, fired up, as you can see, but fired up because we're on the precipice of something big here. And every time I feel like in our nation's story, in our nation's history, as we get to that point where freedom becomes more evident for more of us, the violence increases. The threats in front of us try to get us to cower and to shirk away and to go back in the closet and to hide. And this is one of those moments where we are again saying, hell no. I just saw the color purple, so you know I had to bring that into the room. But the thing I'm so proud of the Human Rights Campaign is that this has been our central focus to answer this call to action to create a more perfect union over the 40 years that we have been in existence. I mean, if you think about the progress that we have made in 40 years as an LGBTQ plus community, it is phenomenal. I mean, 40 years ago, you would be fired on the spot for being out at work. 40 years ago, if you contracted HIV or AIDS, that was a death sentence that took out a generation of gay men. 40 years ago, the idea of marrying the person that you loved was a dream, let alone planning for it and having a reality television show that could follow you doing it. Friends, I'm here today because the moment that we're in feels so familiar. We face stark realities like the one that we are looking at before, and we've always had a choice to make. We could whimper, we could whine, we could cower, we could give up. But we have always decided to come together, to fight back, and to envision something that is more bold, more free, and more transformative than anything any generation before us could have imagined. So today, I'm standing here as president of the Human Rights Campaign and proud to say that the Respect for Marriage Act is the law of the land, codifying protections into law for the LGBTQ plus community for us to marry. I'm proud to say that in this generation, today, we have a chance to end the HIV/AIDS epidemic in our lifetime. Today, I'm proud to say that when you look across the world, there is more out and open LGBTQ plus representation than ever before. Yeah, I'm talking about folks like Karine Jean-Pierre, who's sitting at the most powerful podium in the nation as a White House press secretary. I'm talking about the first out prime minister in France who was just elected into office. I'm talking about people like Jeff Gennett, who is the CEO of Macy's, an out and proud man leading one of the largest retailers in the country. This is progress. And this is a type of progress that is exactly at stake if we don't continue to take action. Because the change that I'm talking about that we've seen over the last 40 years at the Human Rights Campaign, it didn't occur overnight. It happened because we believed in the power of our people. It happened because we amassed a movement of supporters in big cities and small towns, of Democrats and Republicans, of private sector folk and public sector folk, of folks that were coming together across lines of difference because we believed that we could change the course of history, and we did. And fundamentally, it happened because we understood very clearly at the time, and just as clearly as we do today, that the fight for LGBTQ plus equality is fundamentally and essentially a fight for our people and for our very democracy. So I want to say this. Let me check. Last year, for the first time in the history of the Human Rights Campaign, we declared a national state of emergency for LGBTQ plus Americans. Now, this was in response to nearly 600 anti-LGBTQ plus bills that were introduced in state legislatures across the country, particularly targeting trans lives and trans kids, 80 of which were signed into law. But not only was it the bad bills, with each bill that was introduced, we saw as much as a 400% increase in online bullying and harassment geared towards LGBTQ plus kids. Not only was it the bad bills, but we saw an all-time high of hate crimes against our community. 1 in 5 of every hate crime being motivated by anti-LGBTQ plus violence. Not only was it the bills, but we saw another deadly year for trans lives, particularly Black trans women. And as I've been traveling the country, it's been very clear to me that what's happening isn't just one state of emergency. It's millions and millions of individual states of emergency that are playing out in our communities every single day. I mean, look, my friends, when Proud Boys are showing up with AR-15s outside of libraries and drag queen story hours, you better believe we are in a state of emergency. When allies like Lori Carlton are being shot and murdered for waving a pride flag in allyship, we are in a state of emergency. When parents are uprooting their families because they'd rather mourn their homes than their kids, we're living in a state of emergency. From pediatricians receiving death threats to teachers who are facing charges for mentioning LGBTQ plus people, from discrimination that persists in housing and credit and public services, my community is in a chilling state of emergency. And the thing about it is, as the old folks used to say to me, I may not know the song, but this rhythm surely is familiar. Because this system of oppression and violence that we're experiencing, it's not new. From the revolutionaries in that Tea Party in Boston, to the brave foot soldiers in the civil rights movement, to the dedicated land stewards in the indigenous rights movement, to the relentless people that have fought for disability rights, for reproductive rights, we have always seen defenders of inclusive democracy be met with the same old playbook of division, of trying to conquer us, and ultimately threaten us with violence. What we're seeing play out, we have to see it for what it is. They're pitting us against one another so we don't look at the real problem. It's not white versus black. It's not straight versus gay. It's not born here versus immigrant. It's not Democrat versus Republican. What we are seeing play out is an extremism that threatens all of us. An obsession with restricting freedoms that threatens all of us. An obsession with preserving power that threatens all of us. And that's why we see bomb threats at schools, and Nazis at drag shows, and Molotov cocktails terrorizing churches. One thing that we have to be clear about is that this violence is and has always been a response to the power that we hold. Donna Edwards said it on this panel earlier. We can't be obsessed with the 25% when there's 75% of America that is on the right side of history, y'all. So I've been thinking more and more about what it means for us to move forward, knowing that we are the majority, but still threatened by such a nature of extremism and violence, right? And understanding that the political violence that we are seeing in our day-to-day lives and in our politic, it's a threat to the very existence of all of us. I got to remind myself that on today, we are still living in a democracy. Is that right? Is that right? Okay, I grew up in the church. I got to hear some call and response sometimes, all right? We are still living in a democracy where the people have a say. Is that right? That's right. So today we have the chance to do as James Baldwin instructed, to love this country enough. Yes, to criticize her, but to love her enough to make her more perfect too. And I want to say this, because we know extremists are watching us, right? Y'all live streamed it, I heard. Love of country does not mean never having to say you're sorry. And it certainly doesn't mean revising history so you can skip the apology altogether. For me, love of country means owning the past and learning from it. It means seeing the present as it is and reaching for a future that we can all believe in. A future that's not great again, but a future that's greater than anything that could have been dreamt up before right now. You know, there are a lot of things that we can do to advance this work and this movement and this fight towards equality and a true representative democracy. There are a couple things I want to underscore for us as we're getting into our conversations and, more importantly, into our actions outside of this room. And I will say, this room is an interesting one to meet in because some reports said that some of the people that were conspiring around January 6th met in hotel rooms in this building to plan the attack. So what a way the universe moves that we're here talking about how to undo those wrongs. But the first thing, and I think, Mr. Jenkins, you said it right, we got to humanize this fight for progress and equality. We got to humanize one another enough to truly listen to people that we disagree with. You know, you said something that stuck with me. You said, humanity makes the idea of violence nearly impossible. That's one of our charges together here. And democracy has always meant being at the table with people that we disagree with, engaging across different perspectives. Now's the time when we have to create space to do that. And it ain't happening in the comments on your Instagram. It's happening in person in rooms like this that we can cultivate together. The second thing I want us to think about as we're getting into 2024, and this could not be more urgent, is using our political power and our influence beyond closed-door meetings with elected officials, but to speak out boldly and in public and to use our relationships together to transform the institution. Because I truly believe that when I talk about protecting democracy, I'm actually talking about reimagining it. John Lewis used to say this all the time. It's time for us to ensure that America finally lives up to her promise to us, to all of us. So I gotta say, you know, being a Black queer girl, family from Iowa, growing up in Chicago, I never knew that rooms like this could exist. Rooms like this where we have the capacity to literally change the world. So I have to say, I am in awe of all of you. I'm honored to be in your company, and I am gonna be relentless in pursuit of ensuring that our democracy lives up to her promise to all of us. So thank you for coming today.
Thank you so much. Give me a hug. This is a beautiful conversation. I hope everyone has had a chance to enjoy lunch, get back to your seats. And if you're watching at home, I hope, depending on your time zone, I hope you got to eat too. One of you is in Tajikistan. I don't know what time it is there. Maybe you're having midnight snack. I'm gonna just say the briefest of brief things about our keynote conversation and then invite them to the stage. This is a conversation we've been looking forward to for many months, and really this whole day was built around this conversation. It's timely, it's relevant. I know it's going to be fascinating. Our conversation talking about the stakes to U.S. democracy for political violence, the threats and intimidation that come part and parcel with it. Chris Matthews is a legendary TV journalist, former anchor of Hardball on MSNBC. He anchored every presidential election from 1994 to 2020, which blows my mind. Worked in the Carter White House, worked for Tip O'Neill, and is the author of 8 books. Jim Comey, also needing no introduction, but I will introduce him, is former FBI director for Obama and briefly, famously, for President Trump. A mob prosecutor in the Southern District of New York, defense lawyer, aerospace general counsel, and author of 3 best-selling books, one of which is, in fact, a crime novel, which I can't wait to start reading. Chris has a few questions for Jim, and I am looking forward to hearing the answers. So without further delay or ado, I'll turn it over to these two. If you would please come up onto the stage and let us hear you.
Thank you. Well, like everyone else, I'm honored to be here. My wife Kathleen joins us. She was the recent Democratic Party chairman of Maryland, so we have another Politico here. The cause of democracy is probably my main concern. I'm not quite as dramatic as our previous speaker. I don't think anybody is as dramatic as that. But I do have a lot of concern about where we are right now, and I want to bring them to Jim Comey. I want to ask you just in generally, I think we've had political figures in our history that have a sense of the American nervous system. I think Nixon, whatever you say about him, he had a sense of the 50s and what we were worried about with communism and just the whole mental state of the country. He really knew it, and he could work with it. And I wonder whether Trump has ability to do that too, to work the squirrely part of our minds, the worried part of our minds. And he connect with it in a way that Hillary Clinton and a lot of regular politicians have no idea how to do it, that he can do it. And I think he's doing it right now. Hostages. Hostages. The same word we've been used to with Hamas and what's going on in Gaza. The very word right on the tip of our tongues, he said. So he grabbed that word, the J6, hostages. And he even says, some people call them prisoners. I call them hostages. He wants this fight. What do we do about that?
Well, first, thanks for having us for this conversation. I really look forward to it. I guess I should start by saying Donald Trump and I weren't that close, so I'm not that good. I'm not sure he's that good at understanding what's in his mind, but I think he's doing something that the prior panel talked about. It's not too dramatic to say we're seeing a lost cause type effort to rewrite, to normalize shocking and horrible behavior. And this is part of it, to use words to relabel, to put up statues in honor of our Confederate heroes, except Jim Longstreet, who betrayed the lost cause. And so that's part of what's going on. But I want to start, though, Chris, by saying I want to be clear-eyed about the threat that January 6th represents, but I also don't want to overstate it. I think there's a risk, and it's a product of my own experience, that those of us in the security business, when something horrible happens, especially if it was in part the product of a security failure, there's a danger that we will overstate the threat. And I actually think, and I was part of this, so this is about me, that September the 11th was a horrible event, but it was in large measure a security failure of our imagination and our preparation. And a group of terrorists got extraordinarily, I hate to use the word lucky, but lucky, and brought down buildings they never imagined they could bring down. And we responded to that by, in part, making Al-Qaeda an existential threat in our minds to the United States. And I think that led us to do things at home and abroad that were mistakes. And so I hope we're not going to repeat any of those mistakes about January 6th, because it was in the main a security failure.
Yeah.
Right? It was a threat that moved at the speed of daylight walking. And I still don't know the answer to how that hill was not adequately defended against that threat. But had it been adequately defended, it never would have happened. And as a security professional, that was what was in part so weird about that day. I was shocked by the activity, but I was shocked by the lack of preparation. And so what I don't want to do is respond to that by saying, there's a boogeyman under the bed. It's Trumpist violence, because that's going to be used against us. We're already hearing it. We can't hold Trump accountable in the criminal courts because of the violence that might bring. We can't hold him accountable under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment because of the violence that will bring. I think there's a lot of effort on the right to overstate that threat.
Yeah.
And so I separate threats and threat. We are experiencing an epidemic of threats aimed at good public servants. As someone who's received a lot of threats, they're terrifying, they unsettle your families, they're really bad, and there are those who act on those threats. But when I stare at the threat, capital T, I'm not sure it's that significant. Where were they when Donald Trump was arraigned in Manhattan in Atlanta, in Florida, in D.C., where were those who were going to overrun us with violence? I think they're home because we scared the shit out of them with the prosecutions of January.
Well, let me. I have a little method I do. I always say, suppose they got away with it. With Nixon and Watergate, suppose they got away with it. Here, suppose the Metropolitan Police didn't arrive. It was just, I was a Capitol cop. I know what power they have. They were all individually, they were good people and they're doing the best they could, but they couldn't keep the doors closed. And the Metropolitan Police arrived an hour or two later and they saved the day. But suppose they hadn't arrived. Suppose they got a hold of the vice president. They got a hold of Pelosi, the Speaker of the House. Where do you think it was going?
I don't know. There were those in the crowd who were acting with organization and specific seditious intent, Oath Keepers, Proud Boys. And there were a whole lot of others who were morons who believed the lies of Donald Trump. And so how that would play out, I don't know. It would have been awful in all kinds of ways.
Remember the guy, there was an African-American guy. He was leading them in the wrong direction so they wouldn't go chasing after, I think, Mitt Romney. And so there were really efforts to decoy them and to misdirect them so they could save the lives of these members who knew their lives were threatened.
Yeah, and by the way, this is very personal for me. My son was one of the first responders, a SWAT officer who stood on the steps facing the Washington Monument, got hit in the neck with something thrown from the crowd. And so this is personal. There were heroic actions by the first responders on site. I don't mean to take anything away from them when I say, had there been 2,000 officers deployed to protect the Hill, it would have been protected. I'm not trying to take anything away from the Goodmans and the others who sacrificed so much that day. But I don't want it to lead us into overstating the threat. There's a significant threat, but I don't want to repeat history and imagine an existential threat. We've had political violence in this country, but I don't think we are on the cusp of that kind of violence. We face something that you and I are going to talk about that we have to continue to address, but it's not the existential threat, we can't hold Donald Trump accountable because we're afraid of the violence.
Well, we've always wondered about whenever there's an act of violence, whether it's 9/11 and who's cheering for it as opposed to opposing it. Some people cheering when we don't like them to cheer. The Irish always wonder how many of them are supporting the IRA and how many weren't supporting it. Today, they're not supporting it. And I think you wonder about whether the people are secretly saying, well, I'll vote. I'm going to vote that way. I'm going to vote for those people. I'm going to vote for all the people that fought at the Capitol. In my family, I know it in Pennsylvania. I know there's a reality out there to it. My brother says, me and all my friends are voting for Trump. And I go, is that because of what they saw, the elite cracking down on the regular people? I mean, you don't think there's a wave out there?
No, I think there is an audience that is susceptible to the language of violence, the encouragement to violence. It's also an audience that is, as against a lot of the threats that I worked, and my former deputy Andy McCabe is here and is an expert in ways that I'm not, the threats we worked were less deterrable because you were talking about a threat involving people who wanted to go to a reward in paradise, willing to lay down their lives because of this enemy they saw. That's not this audience, which makes this audience deterrable. And so I wasn't being facetious. I think what has happened is that the 1,200 prosecutions out of January the 6th, I know this because I've talked to people who are still doing the work, has sent a shockwave of deterrence through that audience. These are, in the main, people with jobs, people with roots in the communities you talked about. They can be frightened, and that's what deterrence is. And so that wave of deterrence works against the rhetoric that we have to stand up and fight. We have to fight. Against that comes, we will ruin your lives if you fight. I think the accountability that's represented in the 1,200 is essential. Every single person who committed an offense on Capitol Hill that day must be held accountable so that the message is, never again, don't you dare. Protest, shout, march, but don't you dare try and interfere in the constitutional process of this country or we will ruin you. That's why those cases are so important. I don't think that most of those people have been prosecuted would offend again. It's not about that. General deterrence. Don't you dare, any of you. We have always had a stew, a radioactive stew in the basement of America.
Yeah.
It's misogynistic, it's racist, there's violence there in America's basement. It's just part of who we are. But we control it in two different ways. We control it by building a building of law around it that says, you come out of these doors, we're going to lock your butt up. But we also put control rods that are cultural down into the radioactive stew. And what's been happening in this country is, over the last 7, 8 years, is the control rods are being withdrawn by people like Donald Trump and his enablers.
Yeah.
And radiation is banging around inside the building. The building of law has done a really good job of containing it and sending a message. But it's not enough. The reason a gathering like this is so important and the meetings you all talked about are so important is we need to send a message that we have to push the control rods back down in. It's not okay to talk about violence. It's not okay for one of our two parties, the Republicans, to be embracing the idea that January 6th was a heroic event. It's not okay. They're trying to pull the control rods out. We must push it deeper and deeper into the stew.
Trump's out there saying, and I'll just use the Trump because his behavior, I want to focus on more than what he is or what he's been doing. I think about the guy just picked up in Florida, a guy named Shapiro down there. He's just been arrested for threatening Swalwell's wife, the congressman from California. You had the case of a Utah guy, a federal agent killed him because he was threatening the life of the president. You say there, but you have camera work. I mean, all these people, the 700 people that have confessed to their crimes of January 6th, you've got them on camera, right? So you can prove that, hey, I got your picture there, buddy. You're going to jail. In fact, there's 20 or so cases. These are felony cases. You actually have the evidence against them. That hasn't shut up Donald Trump. He's out there making a joke about Paul Pelosi getting hit on the head with a hammer in a life-threatening situation and say, where's Nancy? He's actually making a joke right now about a criminal assault in the middle of the night in San Francisco. He's laughing at it. He's personally laughing at law enforcement.
Again, I don't know his mind, but he is laughing in some ways. He's terrified in others because the great shining stress test success of America in the last 4 years has been the rule of law. The courts have held, the culture of our legal profession has held. You can say whatever you want with mascara running down your face in front of Four Seasons Total Landscaping, but if you come into an American courtroom and you lie, as a litigant or an attorney, there will be severe consequences. That message has been sent across by Republicans.
So the $300 million lawsuit against Rudy Giuliani is having an effect.
Oh, it matters. It matters. The pleas from the attorneys in Atlanta matter. The cases matter. This is us as a society imposing accountability. So Donald Trump may laugh on the outside, but accountability is coming for him. My hope is that we don't allow the boogeyman under the bed to scare us into backing off that accountability. No, no, no. There must be accountability. The threat is significant. I'm sure we're going to talk about what it means to be threatened as an official. But we shouldn't imagine this monster that keeps us from doing what we have to do to be a healthy democracy.
So the only one suing the court right now, going to the Supreme Court, is Donald Trump. He's looking for immunity. But the average person doesn't have immunity who engages in this kind of behavior. He can launch an attack on the Capitol and be immune to prosecution because he evaded conviction by the U.S. Senate.
Well, let's see how that turns out. I mean, that is, the rule of law is in progress. In fact, this morning, I'm sure some of you might have been caught in traffic, where they were arguing in front of the D.C. Circuit that very question, and it'll be resolved. I'm optimistic as to how it'll be resolved, that as the district court said, we don't have a divine right of kings in the United States. And I'm reasonably confident the court's not going to find that an impeachment and acquittal operates as a double jeopardy bar. So there is going to be accountability. There's also going to be a lot of challenge for local officials dealing with these threats. As I said, I meant it. There's an epidemic of threats, and please don't hear me to say that's not significant. It's really important that law enforcement hold those people who are in the main keyboard cowboys accountable. It's very important that they hold accountable the disturbed few who will act on those threats, but those should not stop us from doing what we have to do.
just in terms of practice, how do you distinguish between the wacko that calls up and says, I can't stand Nancy Pelosi and I'm going to do something about it, and doesn't do anything about it, and the guy that is a danger?
Well, you identify the person and then do an assessment of their life. Talk to their neighbors, their friends, find out what their roots are in the community, what their mental health history is, all of those things that you use in every case to assess a subject, and then hold them accountable regardless, because it doesn't matter whether you plan on acting on it. If you threaten someone, this case is being brought all over the country by U.S. attorneys using this interstate threat statute. Hold them accountable, and the degree of the punishment will be driven by the characteristics of the person. Most of them are these keyboard cowboys. There are dangerous people out there.
What's a keyboard cowboy?
Just someone who's heroic only when they're sitting behind the keyboard.
Yeah, I think about journalists sometimes that way. Op-ed writers. Anyway, here's a Brookings Institution poll of the public. It said, quote, because things have gotten so far off, true American patriots may have to resort to violence in order to save our country. Now, this to me sounds like 7 days in May kind of stuff. Some general decides he's going to knock off the president. A quarter of the country agree with that statement. A third of Republicans do, and 40% of Trump supporters. So you're talking about counter-influencing people like this. Isn't it mainstreaming, becoming more mainstream for people to actually say things like that, at least to pollsters? They're telling pollsters, yeah, I think I can get the violence.
Yeah, because people like Donald Trump and Congresswoman Stefanik and lots of others have created a permission structure for people to talk that way. And it matters. That's the control rods coming out. You can make a difference if we have a concerted effort to press a cultural control rod in. Maybe the most significant example in my life is when I was a kid, George Carlin had a routine about the 7 dirty words you couldn't say on television. And one of them was the F word. I'm not going to say it now because who knows, but I can say that freely. One of the most remarkable and cool things that's happened in my life is that's not the greatest epithet in America today. The greatest epithet in America today is a race-based word that begins with N. Yeah. It cannot be said publicly. That is amazing and wonderful. That's a cultural change. There are still lots of racists in this country, but they can't talk that way because it's not culturally acceptable. It's been driven down. We need a similar effort to push the control rods in so it's not okay to talk about violence. It's not okay to talk about watering the tree of liberty with the blood of tyrants and patriots. It's not okay. That's not about the FBI's job, the prosecutor's job. That's about the jobs of the rest of us to push the control rods into the stew.
Let's talk about the FBI. A quarter of the country has told the Washington Post pollsters that they suspect or have solid evidence, that's their term, solid evidence that the FBI organized January 6th. They got solid evidence out there. So what do you do when the law enforcement, the good guys, are portrayed as the bad guys by a significant portion of the country?
First of all, I really like the framing that I think Donna gave us, that we should instead think 75% of Americans are not wingnuts. So that's a great way to think about it. That there's only so much you can do.
But that's your 75%.
Right.
They're the good guys.
But look, I guess to be funny about it, because I don't know what the percentages are of those who think the FBI is holding in its basement evidence of aliens landing on the earth, that the FBI has secrets about the Kennedy assassination we haven't revealed. So that number in the main doesn't surprise me or depress me. It does.
What does that number tell you? Is that just American wariness, suspicion of all authority? Is it Butch Cassidy stuff? We're the outlaw. I mean, what is that thing that says, I do mistrust everybody? I do mistrust the Warren Commission. I mistrust Bobby Kennedy. Was he really killed by Sirhan? Well, we saw it, but, I don't know. I mean, what is that?
I think there's meaning in conspiracies. I think people, by imagining there isn't a secret authority that's out there that runs things in an odd way. I'm not an expert on this, but I think experts would tell you that's consoling to people. It imposes a sense of order on a world to their eyes otherwise lacks order. It's all being controlled by the Illuminati or something. So I think the human brain is naturally drawn to these things, especially the American brain.
Yeah.
So it doesn't depress me, but it's very important for the FBI to continue interact with the American public and talk about the work, show the work. I found it, I'm trying to pick a neutral word, I found it very disappointing that there was no word from the FBI or the Department of Justice for 3 days after the execution of a court-ordered search warrant at Mar-a-Lago. 3 days while lies were told to the American people that the American people, millions of them, internalized it, so that by the time Merrick Garland, who seems like a wonderful person, went to the podium and said, actually, we had a court order and here's how it works, it was too late. People had internalized that falsehood. Yeah. And so I know no one wants to, you may overlearn some of the lessons from my experience. Nobody wants to be out there in the public square talking about the work. You must be, because in your absence, a whole lot of lies are being told and they're not being countered, and they become part of the bloodstream of a lot of our country.
What's it mean to you that 7 of 10 Republicans say too much has been made of what happened on January 6th? I mean, we all saw the pictures. It's not some of us saw it, some of us didn't. No, we all saw the pictures over and over again. We know what happened, and yet 7 of 10 Republicans, that's half the country, don't think it was that big a deal.
They have to.
But they don't.
But no, I'm saying they have to approach it that way. Think about the choices they face. There's only 2. When they stare at those same images, they speak to them, and they say, you fool, look what you were part of. Look at what you were part of has done to America. So that's a decision branched right there. You can either then say, yeah, you're right, I was part of something really bad, I'm sorry, or you can try and rewrite it, push it into the corner, memory hole it. Donald Trump was right in his reptilian way that he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and get away with it because of the nature of people. Once I've attached my identity to him, every bad thing he does drags me deeper, because to get out, I have to admit, he shot someone on Fifth Avenue and I ignored that. He attacked the family of a Gold Star veteran. He talked about grabbing women by their genitals. Add it. And so now I'm going to walk away. How do I do that? What's the thing we do worst as humans? Admit when we're wrong, especially when it's about my identity. How do I admit that? I've prosecuted fraud cases where the victims came to the sentencing. The guy pled guilty. They came to the sentencing to speak for him because they could not acknowledge that they were wrong, and in a hugely important and embarrassing way. They couldn't say that about themselves, even after he did. That fog has trapped millions of Americans. So I totally get why 70 or 80.
So they're in for a dime, in for a dollar.
Yeah. I mean, again, I don't mean to be overdramatic. The lost cause analogy is apt. People who were involved in enslaving other human beings and killing to preserve that institution can either, when that's over, say, I did something deeply wrong and immoral, or rewrite it. Most humans are going to choose to rewrite it. There are some who have the courage to say, God, I'm ashamed of myself. I'm ashamed of what I did, but that's not human nature. And that's a part that Donald Trump gets. And he's out there now with the hostages, dragging them deeper and deeper. You couldn't get away from me when I did all those other things. You can't get away now. That's the unique hold of a demagogue.
Yeah, and also it's the challenge to someone like who I do respect with a mixed effect, Mitch McConnell, who I know he loves the institution of the Senate, and yet he hasn't done anything.
Yeah, I don't want to comment on that.
Okay, well, I think because there are people that don't.
He used to come to my secure briefings and sit in front of me and fall dead asleep, so I don't know him either.
Well, he might hear that one. That might get out, that one. We talked, the woman from the leader of the Human Rights Campaign was here. It was so eloquent, obviously, and passionate. But, I've been going to those affairs for years, 20, 30 years ago, I've been going to them. And I think a lot of it in American life is about change. And it's not about ideology. It's about your uncle at the Thanksgiving Day dinner, and he's got an old attitude about the sexual stuff and things like that. And he'll go, yeah, he'll give you an old attitude. You get them a little shot here and there. But that's part of life, and you sort of accept the fact that older people have a different view of things that are going on right now, right? The New York Times has points of view of the American people that a lot of American people aren't comfortable with. It's just a different point of view. It's a little hipper than they want to be. But here's a new one. Those who think America has changed for the worse since the 1950s. Now, that to me says a lot. The 1950s means pre-civil rights, pre-voting rights, black activism, the whole opportunity to change the country. They liked it before it was changed, obviously. They liked Leave It to Beaver and, Argane comedy, for all I know. They want to go all the way back. But this is 3 out of 5 Democrats think the country's changed for the worse. 9 out of 10 Republicans. And 3 out of those 10 say they think it supports violence. In other words, they're so crotchety about change and what they're reading, if they're reading any newspaper, the New York Times, or they're reading the New York Post, obviously, and that aggravates them. They're reading every day about a new country they don't like. How much of that is feeding this Trumpian thing, this anti-democratic thing?
I think a big part of it is what earlier speakers talked about. The country has changed overwhelmingly for the better in my lifetime and your lifetime. The high water mark for white men may have passed us by, which is a very, very good thing.
I think we're talking about the Mad Men era.
Yeah, but I think two things are at work. First is a natural human tendency to say things suck today in a way they never have. When I talk to university audiences, I'm a depressing speaker, but I say to the kids, look, when I was a kid, this country was coming apart, literally. So I grew up in the 1960s. The president was murdered on television, and his brains were on his wife's pink dress. And then Dr. King was murdered. Malcolm X was murdered before that. That dead president's brother was murdered in a ballroom in California. Our cities were burning down. Thousands and thousands of American men were dying in Vietnam in a war we didn't understand. Thousands more were fleeing to Canada to get away from it. This country was coming apart. There were bombings. This sounds like an exaggeration. I don't mean it as an exaggeration. Every single day in the United States, in the period about 68 to 72, there was a bomb went off somewhere in the United States. But America didn't come apart because Lincoln liked to quote Seward saying, there's always enough virtue to save America. And then he paused and said, but just enough. So yeah, America has gone through difficult times. It's not true that America is worse today than long ago, but everybody likes to think that. To come back to the Trump thing, though, I think there's something else at work with a lot of those folks. Think about the amount of change that's happened, not just for white men in this country in our lifetimes, Chris. We've changed the way we think about faith, family, community, marriage, the role of women, so many other things. Everything has changed, and that's destabilizing for a lot of people. And I get why they are ripe picking for a demagogue. I had to go to Toronto for a business meeting, and I decided to drive and take one of my daughters because I wanted to drive her through central Pennsylvania. We drove through these little old mill towns of central Pennsylvania, and I said to her, look at these places. Washington is only 90 miles from here, but it seems like a world away. Yeah. These people feel left behind. They're angry, they're alone. Now, there's lots of reasons you could explain to them why they feel that way and why there's a countervailing tremendous goodness in America, but I get why they are ripe for the picking of a demagogue. And we have that person. We have that person as president. We have that person running for president again.
And you've got it coming up again in November, because where you're talking about is where I think his strength really lies. The rural areas of Pennsylvania, where it's 68% supported him last time. It'll be much higher this time. It's going to be much more tricky. You know, you talk about the violence of the country today, and some of it's imminent. Facebook group in 2017, there was a group called Terminate the Republican Party. And one of their characters went out to a Republican baseball practice session. We have it every year here, of course, between the two parties, and almost killed Steve Scalise. He's a good guy, I think. And then you have Paul Pelosi in the middle of the night being attacked by a guy with a hammer. You got Justice Brett Kavanaugh, who lives near our neighborhood in Chevy Chase. He's surrounded by, this isn't notorious trouble, but it's just people haranguing him. They don't like his judgment in a Dobbs case. You had this Utah guy who was just shot by federal agents who was threatening President Biden. And I mentioned that Florida guy who just got picked up on Friday, I think, for threatening the life of Eric Swalwell. You got round the clock, 24/7 bodyguards protecting Anthony Fauci. Why? So there's a sort of, what is the, Are we living, and then I go back to something more historic, and I want to ask you about guns and American life. Of our presidents, I don't think Guatemala matches our record in what we do with our presidents. Lincoln was shot and killed, Garfield was shot and killed, McKinley was, John F. Kennedy was, Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, Harry Truman, all were facing life-threatening situations. Gerald Ford was shot at twice, Ronald Reagan was shot at, and the bullet was right near his heart. Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, John Lennon. This is a very dangerous country. It really is, and the idea that we're just looking at the latest rumors of war, no. We're a dangerous country with a lot of guns. And our leaders at the highest level have been shot at and killed, or killed. What's that about us? Not just recently. What's that about us as Americans and a willingness to resort to gunplay, to get even with people we don't like politically?
Well, first, it's a reminder that the threats have to be paid attention to. They may be, in the main, people who are never going to leave their basement, but there are disturbed people who will act on it and have easy access to a gun in America. So I don't want to be heard to say we shouldn't take it seriously. Those have to be worked. These things tend to move in fads, again, because it becomes part of the rhetoric of those who are listened to, and so people become attached to this idea that I ought to be threatening because there's lots of threats going on. What it says about us is we are a mixed up, wonderful, terrible, violent, amazing country. We've always had a baseline level of violence in America. We have more guns than people in America now, and they don't expire like yogurt. They're going to be, even if we stop selling guns today, we're going to have 360 million guns in this country 20 years from now. And so we are a complicated, difficult country. We have been since the beginning, and I don't have a great answer for that. But I think it's important that we not deny this reality.
Let's talk about what you were talking about, how law enforcement can penetrate into our culture and give people a sense of confidence. And I was thinking, I interviewed Brad Raffensperger. He's an amazing guy. You know, it's not a big deal being Secretary of State of a state. Most of us don't know who our Secretary of State is or ever will know. But he had Donald Trump on the phone with him, and Trump said, find me 12,000 votes. I mean, I don't know what it's like to have that experience, because they had hand counted the votes in Georgia. He knew his number. He had it to the vote, and he had to take the president on, practically locking arms with him. He had to take him on and say, no, you're wrong. How do we get secretaries of state and election workers like the two women who just won that big lawsuit? How do you get people the guts to say, you know, I can face this guy in court? I could be on the winning side of this thing. When all this noise about him leading the election right now in the battleground states, he's leading, I think, all of them, including Wisconsin. And you go, maybe he's going to win again. Maybe he's got 4 more years. Maybe he'll have the Attorney General working for him. Maybe the whole Justice Department will be working for him. Everybody's going to be working for him, including all the scaredy cats. They're all going to be working for him. How am I going to stand up to that now?
Through continuing to send messages of accountability. The rule of law is reassuring for good people and should be frightening for bad people. Anyone who thinks that it was a good career move to be one of Donald Trump's lawyers during the fall of 2020 has been disabused of that notion. There really is a deep culture of rule of law in the United States. Culture can be frustrating when you're trying to change it. It should be reassuring. Again, it doesn't matter whether judges are Republicans or Democrats or independents. There is a real thing that is bred into the lawyers and the entire legal system in this country. That lying is not acceptable, that we will hold people accountable, and that it happened and is ongoing should be comfort and reassurance, and also a little bit of deterrence to those going forward. Anybody tempted to monkey around in 2024 with vote counts or to do the things that people were asked to do in 2020 now has a living example of what happens to those people. You will be ruined. You will be incarcerated, maybe both of those things. That's a really important message to send. And we shouldn't be afraid to send it because it's part of who we are, that rule of law.
How do you advertise that right now. I mean, promulgate that, because I think we're in a state of squirreliness. I think everybody picks up the paper, they say, well, Biden's too old, and Trump's randy as hell, he's gung-ho, he really is going to run for president again, he's really running again, he's killing his opponents, he's running at the 60% level against all opponents. None of them seems to have gotten any traction. He's going to win. Now, when he gets to court, he's got to get through the Supreme Court for immunity. He has to not having immunity. He will have to face justice. Do you have a sense that the wheels of justice in 2024 will be mobilized to act?
Yes.
Do you think we're going to have court trials this year?
Yes. The system is acting now. The great thing about especially federal judges, all judges, in the main, they don't give a crap about the conversation going on outside the courthouse. They are part of a culture. They have sworn to uphold the law. It will grind forward and do its job. And so people, I'm not sure there's a way to influence that, and that's, to my mind, that's a good thing. There will be trials this year. I don't know whether it will be the Jack Smith's case here in DC or the documents case in Florida. That one strikes me as the most straightforward. But I'm optimistic.
How about the RICO case, the one in Fulton County?
Hard for me to handicap it because I don't know that system well enough. There are things about that make me nervous. I'd rather see Donald Trump tried in the 2 federal cases because they're predictable, they're limited, they're focused in a really good way. You want to know what the evidence is that will be offered against Donald Trump in either of those cases? Read Jack Smith's indictments. He wrote what's called a speaking indictment. It's all there. It's like the indictment against Senator Menendez from New Jersey. It's all there. Read it. You'll see what the case will be. It's focused and it's devastating. And so those are the ones I would like to see go first.
Let's talk about the good guys. I want to talk mostly now about the good guys, and they're women. So all of them. I mean, Cassidy Hutchinson works for Mark Meadows. Her book's amazing. Liz Cheney's book, I'm going through it. She actually detailed what she saw. It's not like something as told to. She's seen it, and she describes what every moment of what happened in her experience going through the committee, the January 6th committee. The nerve of these people to actually get it all right, get it all on paper, get it published. And I just wonder, is this going to get to the public? This truth-telling. I keep thinking of Thomas More and how he had to stand up to Henry VIII. And whatever you think about it, the key story there is not just this wonderful man's truth to his religion, that I wished I had honored my God as much as I had my Lord, but the fact is that this king could decree, like all the religions could do in the Middle Ages. They could say, I'm your prince, I'm your king, this is our religion. And you had to become a certain kind of Protestant, whatever, Calvinist, whatever it was, or a Church of England, because the king said so. He just said, I am king, I am head of the Church of England, obey me. And they all said yes, because they're all scared for their lives. They're going to be beheaded. And I look at the way Trump behaves today. If he hadn't said, I won the election, all these people out there wouldn't be saying he won the election. Stefanik wouldn't be saying it. She wouldn't be mimicking every word he speaks. This is kingly-like behavior. He states a fact, and people all say, yes, that's true. They wouldn't have said in the mob that he won the election. The mob wouldn't have said he won the election. He did.
Yeah,
and they all mimic him to the point where these people are grown-up people. They have the power to vote. They are true citizens of the United States, and they mimic his voice. And that's what's frightening about the threat to democracy we're talking about here, that a king can simply speak as a king and will be obeyed. It's frightening.
Yes, it's also revealing of character. I said that legal systems had a stress test. The character of individuals has been subject to that same stress test. I mean, was sitting next to Alex Vindman. I mentioned Andy McCabe. Those are people for whom the stress revealed character. There are millions of people like that, and then there's those who are not. That's just the nature of humans. It's going to be really important going forward that we not allow those people to write their own personal lost cause life story, Because just as Joe McCarthy disappeared after 4 years and suddenly no one had been involved, no one supported him, I wasn't there, there's going to be a lot of that's going to go on when Donald Trump is finally cleansed from the American system. Forget the ordinary people who are caught in the fog of lies. They will find their way out. It's going to be important to hold accountable those whose character was revealed by the stress test.
So here we go, heading forward to the summer of, I'm sorry that this happens.
Mitch McConnell, he heard.
No, it's Morning Joe, which is good. That's good news. Let's talk about this summer. You know, I think about, didn't the Democrats, and that's nobody's fault really, but the Democrats are going back to Chicago. I mean, it's hard to believe when all that happened there in 1968, one of the most, I didn't miss a minute of television that week. I watched every minute of it, but it was all sort of a celebration of hell. It was a terrible thing. We all wish Bobby Kennedy was there at that time. He never got to be there. He couldn't. There's nobody carrying the anti-war cause. But back to Chicago will certainly wake up things. We've got these people with bodyguards. Everybody's getting assigned to bodyguards. I know members of Congress that you can't believe are getting bodyguards. They have to pay for them themselves in some cases. Everybody's getting bodyguarded. Is that part of the solution? The candidate's speech is that, you know, every time Joe Biden gets out to give a speech, I'm sure there's worry.
It has to be, before we move off the bodyguards, it has to be part of the solution in the short run, because there are, among the threats, there will be real, serious threats that disturbed people will act on. But at the same time, we have to figure out a way to address the threat in that way, but not let it dominate us, not let it occupy the space in our heads that it wants to occupy. Most people making threats want to have an effect on those receiving the threat. They want you to worry about them all the time.
What's it called now?
They want you to change.
Swatting or something?
Swatting is when you call and report an emergency that might lead to a SWAT team responding. You want to rent space in that person's head. And so somehow, and I've had more practice at this than most, is that you have to acknowledge the threat, take it seriously, but not give it the space that the threatener wants it to have, not let it affect your family, your sporting activities in a meaningful way. And there's a way to balance those things, but there's a short-term cost, which is you have to have front of mind protecting yourself and your family.
When do you think, we talked about, many of the speakers this morning on the panel were very good on it, this idea of polarization and has it come to a new fever pitch? I've wrestled with it. I think it's a dynamic. I think it has to do with, to some extent, the Vietnam War, which really did drive sons against fathers and fathers against sons. That was really in the family, that war. It was in my life. And I think in many people's lives, it was a family fight over the war. And then, of course, some people ran against the anti-war people rather than for the war, which was a clever political thing to do. Just go against the long hairs and whatever, and then you'd be a popular figure. But they didn't really defend the war. They just attacked the anti-war people. But that was my culture. And then, of course, came Watergate, which a lot of Republicans, I do believe it, and may be right, that it was overkill. Okay, he did some bad things, but let's not make this whole thing about they're corrupt, we're not corrupt. And then it spiraled into the 80s, and I was in Democratic cloakrooms, but I would see the ferociousness of people. They weren't all left-wingers either. They just got ferocious about the partisan nature of politics. We stopped having, in Washington, weekend barbecues between Democrats and Republicans. People used to actually meet the guy who has the office next to them, and they became best friends with the guy for no other reason than his office was next to theirs. And that's what life was like in politics. Kennedy's friends were Republicans, and Biden's friends were Republicans. And this was a life where there wasn't always a constant war. It is today. You can't have a party where you invite both parties to it. You can't get away with it. It won't work. You have to invite a party and invite people that agree with each other in the bubble. The bubble is more powerful than anything in the world is the bubble today.
For reasons that make sense to me, I mean, you had on the prior panel people smarter than I on this, but I've been attracted to those who've explained it by saying we're tribal creatures who crave meaning. We have to have it in our lives, a source of identity, because we see the nature of our existence. We're afraid. And so we seek security and meaning in groups. The potential sources for that meaning have dried up in the United States. The bowling leagues, the churches, the neighborhoods, the associations, the sources of meaning have disappeared on us.
So it's what TV network you watch?
Well, it's what political tribe I'm part of. And so that gives me meaning and identity. And the genius of Donald Trump is he sees that this isn't about policies, it's about meaning and identity. It's about who I am as a person. And once I get you to sign up on that basis, you are not getting away from me, no matter what I do, because to get away is to acknowledge something about yourself that is simply devastating. And so I've got you. And so that's our challenge in this country, and we have to find a way through some of the conversations that were suggested earlier to, in an empathetic way, allow those fraud victims to walk from the courtroom and write a different story that somehow lets themselves out.
Yeah.
It could be I was misunderstood or I had no idea. It doesn't matter what the story is. They have to write a story to escape the fog of lies, and we have to help them do that to get to a healthier place. And this being America will then be on to the next screwed upness, which I can't predict.
Well, there's so much of this about, let me talk about the leader that's behind a good deal of this threat to democracy. It's Donald Trump. And I know him. I found him, he can be very charming, as you know, when you first meet him, and then it gets into a different direction, and he gets very, unpleasant, but he knows how to work people. He has a lot of supporters out there. He works the crowds every night. He's as good as a nightclub comic or a guy with a brick wall behind him. He's a comic, and he knows what works, what people laugh at. He discards terms like Pocahontas when they don't work anymore. He knows which words work and which words don't. He's a very skilled student at our psyche. He's good at it. A lot of Americans feel that the country's unfair. And I don't mean just minorities. I'm talking about people that feel, I didn't get into Harvard. I don't know anybody who goes to Harvard or Yale or Princeton. I don't know any people like that, those people, those elite. I don't go to black tie or white tie dinners. I don't know anything about those people. I see them in movies, I guess, old movies. I don't know who they are. I guess they're the elite. They don't like me. They call me deplorable. I work drive a truck, and I'm trying to make a buck for my family, and I got a section. My wife's got a job. I didn't wish she was working, but she's got a job, and it's rough. And I'm hoping the kid might make it into a community college, or might get to be a plumber's assistant, or going through a program. But they're not in that world. You talked about Pennsylvania, out in those counties, those 60-some counties that are not Philadelphia or Central County, or Penn State, or not Pittsburgh. They're out there in the country. They didn't go to college, most of them. Trump says, I like the non-educated people. I think he used that phrase one time. I like those people. He's pretty direct about it. They're angry because their own lives haven't looked like they've taken any advantage of life. They've gotten no breaks. And they think, wait a minute, who's this president of Harvard? Who's this president of Penn? Yeah, she's into a lot of trouble. I'm not even sure I disagree with her, but great, she's in trouble. I like that. Trump plays on that. It's the mob at the gate, immigrants, and the rod at the top. He's got the exact formula for raising hell.
But
the rod at the top, Harvard, MIT, Penn. The mob at the gate on television every night. He's got the mob. Everybody's afraid of the mob. The elite, they can't stand him. He has walked into this scenario from hell that he can play to, right?
Yes, but we're here today. I'm here today to talk about political violence, the lessons of January 6th,
that's what drives it.
And the prospect for this year. I can't say how they'll vote. I'm hopeful they'll vote in a marginal way, in a different way than they have in the past. But I can say with high confidence that they are deterrable against the threat of political violence. That those are people who are not out today robbing banks. They're not blowing up Army recruiting stations. They are people who see the world very differently than I, but they are deterrable. And that's why come back to what the Department of Justice and the FBI have done. That's why that work is so important. That every FBI field office is working every one of these cases. I wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post about this because I was hearing from all kinds of people inside the FBI that there's a lot of our colleagues who don't get why this is so important. And the director wasn't talking about it. And so I wrote basically a letter to the FBI and published it in the Washington Post. I don't know whether anyone else read it. I know it was read inside the FBI. And I said, it's about general deterrence. You have to find every one of these people, misdemeanants or felons, and send that message, because you've worked lots of crimes as an FBI agent where deterrence doesn't fit. It's really hard to deter normal violent crime. It's really hard to deter drug trafficking because of the ways in which people commit those crimes. January 6th and its ilk are deterrable because you had to get on a bus, you had to come, you had to stand on the ellipse, then you had to make the decision to walk. And when a line was put up, although an imperfect line by the Capitol Police, you had to push through that. That's an audience that's susceptible of deterrence. And that's why every one of those cases matters, and it can change the nature of the threat. That's why I started by saying deterrence works. We shouldn't allow it to be perversely used against us to say the boogeyman is under the bed. Be careful what you do with this rule of law business. There isn't a boogeyman under the bed. There's a serious threat that we just talked about with the Faucis and others, but there isn't the kind of threat that we saw on our televisions on January the 6th. That's not out there. And the FBI is getting up every day worrying about making sure it's not out there, but those groups are disruptible. Right? The Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, have the worst OPSEC on their communications as you can imagine. One of the FBI's challenges in working those cases is you got to figure out which of our 17 informants are we going to use in this group. This is not the Islamic State. This is not Al-Qaeda. Right? This is not the SDS, the Weathermen. This isn't the Panthers, some of the sophisticated actors of the 60s and 70s. This is a group whose behavior can be shaped by fear. And it's been shaped by fear, and the work has to continue.
You know, I think you make me feel good about the law enforcement piece of what's coming, because I think it looks like that is effective. You've got the tape. Thank God somebody was showing movies of all this. I mean, everybody has done what they've done because we've seen them do it. It isn't really that difficult.
Well, they all had their phones, too, so you could track the location. Cool thing about, say, for example, Google's phones is it actually has a barometric pressures, so they can tell you when you're inside or outside. And so you're able to collect all kinds of data to figure out when someone moved in, when they moved out. Again, this is not
I love to hear the tradecraft.
This is not a sophisticated group of actors. They are susceptible to deterrence. And I was joking with someone, but I said, look, even idiots aren't fools. These people would think twice, 3 times before engaging in that kind of conduct. That's why there's nobody in Lower Manhattan in Foley Square when he's arraigned, some wingnuts with, wearing his garb and trying to sell it. That's why there was no one at the courthouse when he was arraigned. Here in Miami or in Tampa, in West Palm or in Atlanta, because this audience can be shaped by the action of the government.
And people are afraid to be seen.
Yeah, for good reason. If you're going to engage in misconduct, the message of January 6th is, the cool thing about deterrence is, in the mind's eye of those people, the FBI is more powerful than it really is. Good, good. Imagine that there's an agent behind every tree. Imagine that they're tracking you in the supermarket. It's not really healthy for the whole country, but for that audience to see us, I'm no longer us, to see the FBI as the boogeyman is exactly where we want to be.
So let's talk about your former organization, which you're proud to lead. The FBI, there's a new book on A. J. Edgar Hoover, pretty pro-Hoover, right?
It paints an accurate picture of a very complex person.
Yeah.
Bad and good.
Yeah.
The most important lesson, to my mind, of that book is that Hoover was no rogue actor. The power structure in the United States, presidents and senators and congresspersons, all knew what he was doing. All signed up for it. Johnson famously was asked after Kennedy was killed, should we get rid of Hoover? And he said, and quoted in the book saying, no, I'd rather have him inside the tent pissing out than outside the tent pissing in. He knew what Hoover was doing. He kept him, and he got special work from the FBI on the '68 Chicago Convention that he shouldn't have gotten. And so, to my mind, that book is a reminder of our tendency to want to blame a person.
Yeah.
No, the problem is us, and that we weren't sufficiently constrained and overseen, and we didn't use our system of government to control ourselves. There were issues with Hoover, but he was a symptom and not a cause.
He also warned Kennedy about Sinatra and the other problems he was involved with.
Again, I know this from the book. I'm not revealing anything from the FBI.
It's not my book, too. So if you think about the positive nature of the speaker from the Human Rights Campaign, which was so eloquent this morning, and you think about hope, law enforcement is one reason for hope. Evidence gathering is a reason for hope. The use of the telephone, or the cell phone, the use of photography, the fact that you can actually catch someone doing it and prove it because you saw it. Those rudimentary facts may have saved the day, and they may end up saving the day in the court with the president. Anything else?
Yeah, what this represents. The Kettering Foundation has changed, right, has stepped out in a way that I don't know the organization, but I'm sure is not entirely uncontroversial and dangerous for a foundation this old, because they see the difference that can be made. I wanted to be part of this when Sharon asked me, because there's no more important
How long did you
work.
wait?
What do you say?
How long did you wait?
I think within 5 minutes. I've known her a long time, but I said, yes, I want to be part of that. What's cool about what's going on in the United States now, especially with young people, is I was worried they were going to withdraw on us and say, it's all okay, boomer, it's all screwed up. The opposite has happened. They are stepping forward and saying, yeah, it's all screwed up, we are going to fix it. And so the idea that an organization as old as this one has decided we are out there, we are going to make a difference, we're going to drive these conversations, that's the control rods being pushed down, and I'm lucky to be a tiny little part of it.
I'm glad to hear that. Also, is Ephraim Zimbalist still carry the day with people, young people today?
No.
He used to be the star of the FBI.
Yeah, and I'll tell you something I did confess that Andy McCabe knows. I summoned is too strong a word. I asked to meet with Dick Wolf, the television producer.
Sure.
I had that guy in my office at FBI 3 times. And I said to him, there need to be programs about the FBI. Every time I turn on the television, I see NCIS. Really? I said, they're awesome people, but there's like 8 of them, right? What about us? What about us? And you know what? He took it to heart. You cannot turn on the television today without seeing attractive, diverse, interesting, intelligent FBI people. That is that organization, and it is exciting that the American people get to see it. It's not Ephraim Zimbalist. I'm sort of the tall, awkward white guy, Ephraim Zimbalist. It's not me. It's something much more interesting, powerful, and better for America than me. I miss it dearly. Andy and I were lucky to be part of it, but I'm glad the American people can see it in that way.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Chris, Morning Joe's on the phone for you here. Please join me in thanking them again. We've referred to her and thanked her. I want to introduce to you now Sharon L. Davies, who is president and CEO of the Charles F. Kettering Foundation. Her experience for decades includes law, academia, public affairs, and more. Prior to Kettering, she was provost and senior vice president of Spelman College, chief diversity officer of The Ohio State University, where she was on law faculty for over 2 decades, occupied the Gregory H. Williams Chair in Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, and directed the Kirwan Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity. I can't wait to hear what she has to say in reflecting about this amazing day of conversation, and I want to thank you all for being here. Without further ado, Sharon Davies, would you please come to the stage?
Thanks so much, Brad. Thank you to all of the incredible speakers who are part of this event. Can we give them another round of applause? I am especially grateful, Jim, for your words about the Kettering Foundation, because we did have to make a decision about what was important for us to focus on at this particular moment in our nation's history, in the global backsliding of democracy. And And so when we had that hard conversation for ourselves at the Kettering Foundation, we decided it was important for us to be more visible in these conversations, more public facing than we had been in the past in order to do our role, live up to our responsibilities as citizens in this nation to help to preserve our democracy and to improve it. I think one of the reasons why all of us were so shocked by the events of January 6th, was that we had not been that accustomed to seeing images of political violence since maybe the age of the civil rights struggles. And Chris told us when he went back through that litany of presidents who had been assassinated or attempted to be assassinated and all of the other violence in our history, that felt like a long time ago to many Americans. And so as we watched those images on January 6th, many of us were shocked that this could actually happen to us. But William Faulkner told us that the past is never dead, that it is not even the past. And when I went back to look further at that quote and thinking about this event, I saw that he also said that all of us labor in webs sown long before we were born, and that what we are dealing with today is being haunted by the wrong turns and roads not taken by previous generations of citizens and leaders in this country. We're haunted by wrong turns and roads not taken. And it's our responsibility today to make sure that we make right turns for our nation's future, our children, our children's children, and that we take roads toward courage that embrace the responsibilities of leadership. I can't think about political violence without thinking about many of those episodes of violence in our past. And one of the things that strikes me as I listen to the speakers today was that connection between past and present. We weren't all alive at these critical moments in our nation's history when many of those acts of violence occurred, but they are connected to what we are experiencing today. My father grew up in the era of Jim Crow as a young black boy in South Carolina. He was born in 1932. His mother was born in 1914. Her mother was born before the turn of the century. These members of my family experienced the violence of that time. And the word that you used, Jim, about rental space that takes up, when you are the victims of that kind of environment of threats and violence, it takes up mental space and your minds, and it affects people and their willingness to put their lives on the line to stand up for their own rights. And part of what was expected of other citizens was that they would be troubled by that. They would say, not okay. We're not living up to the ideals of our democracy, and that's not okay. The mistake that is made by some today who would like to forget about our history or would like to revise our history is that they don't realize how much of a history of heroicism they would be eliminating at the same time. In order for us to progress as a nation towards the fullness of our democracy, there were heroes and sheroes. There were people who were exhibiting uncommon courage. We are actually in the company of people, Americans today, who have exhibited uncommon courage, putting on the line their positions, their reputations, to do what was right. And so we have this connection between past and present. When Jim says that we have to think of what's happening today as a phenomenon that's similar to lost cause thinking after the Civil War, that strikes me as right. And part of our responsibilities now are to make sure that the history of this nation is accurately told. And so I appreciate the calls to action that were part of the remarks of our speakers today. In every moment, that has been a moment of transformation for our nation that has moved us closer to the full democracy that we could be. There were citizens who were engaged in making that happen, in changing, reforming our society. There were citizens who exhibited the ability to face hard truths about ourselves. There were citizens who made the determination to stand up, to right wrongs. A perfect example of that, Rosa Parks, who sat in order to stand up for what she knew was right. At every moment of transformation in this country, there were citizens who were willing and exhibited the courage to act. And we are now at a moment when each one of us is called upon to act, to defend not only our own rights, but to defend the rights of others, to be allies to others who are most vulnerable. So Kelley Robinson's remarks had a deep impact to me. The reason why all of us took the time out of our schedules to be in this room or to set aside time to watch this on streaming or who will listen to these speeches that we have been recording and will make available. The reason for all that is because we know that it is our responsibility to preserve our democracy, that falls to us. As the title of Judy Woodruff's wonderful series about this, America at a Crossroads, suggests to us, is we don't get a pass right now. We don't get to sit this one out. We actually, every single one of us, must be committed to action and have the courage to act at this time, maybe even in the face of threats or possible political violence. We know that we must continue the fight for our democracy that other Americans before us did as well. And so that our children, our grandchildren, and their children and grandchildren will continue to be members of a democratic society. And they won't be haunted by our wrong turns and roads not taken. As Donna Edwards said, the world is watching, and this is the most important election of our lifetime. I am encouraged by the words of our speakers today. I'm encouraged to be a part of a group that is concerned about our democracy. And I know that we will get through this together. And as Kelley Robinson said, that not only will we be protecting democracy as it is when we do that, but as it could be. Thank you very much for being a part of that fight.